Lying there by the river bank through the long spring days, listening lazily to the hum of nature, Buck slowly won back his strength. For that matter, they were all loafing. Buck, John Thornton, and Skeet, and Nig, waiting for the raft to come that was to carry them down to Dawson. Skeet was a little Irish setter who early made friends with Buck. Nig, equally friendly, was a huge black dog with eyes that laughed. As Buck grew stronger, they enticed him into all sorts of ridiculous games in which Thornton himself could not forbear to join. Love, genuine, passionate love, was Buck's for the first time. Love that was feverish and burning, that was adoration, that was madness. It had taken John Thornton to arouse. But in spite of this great love he bore John Thornton, the strain of the primitive, which the Northland had aroused in him, remained alive and active. Deep in the forest, a call was sounding, and often he felt compelled to turn his back upon the fire and to plunge into the forest. Thornton alone held him. When Thornton's partners, Hans and Pete, arrived on the long-expected raft, Buck refused to notice them till he learned they were close to Thornton. "I'm not hankering to be the man that lays hands on you while he's around," Pete announced. Ere the year was out, Pete's apprehensions were realized. Black Burton, a man evil-tempered and malicious, had been picking a quarrel with a tenderfoot at the bar. When Thornton stepped good-naturedly between, Burton struck out without warning. Thornton was sent spinning and saved himself from falling only by clutching the rail of the bar. Those who were looking on heard something that is best described as a roar, and they saw Buck's body rise up in the air as he left the floor for Burton's throat. The man saved his life by instinctively throwing out his arm. Buck loosed his teeth from the flesh of the arm and drove in again for the throat. This time the man succeeded only in partly blocking, and his throat was torn open. Then the crowd was upon Buck, and he was driven off. His reputation was made. Later on, he saved John Thornton's life in quite another fashion. The three partners were lining a long and narrow poling boat down a bad stretch of rapids. Thornton remained in the boat, helping its descent by means of a pole. At a particularly bad spot where a ledge of rock jutted out into the river, Hans cast off the rope, ran down the bank with the end in his hand to snub the boat when it cleared the ledge. This it did, and was flying downstream when Hans checked it with the rope and checked it too suddenly. The boat flirted over and snubbled into the bank bottom up, while Thornton, flung sheer out of it, was carried downstream toward the worst part of the rapids. Buck had sprung in on the instant. He overhauled Thornton. When he felt him grasp his tail, Buck headed for the bank. Thornton knew the shore was impossible. He scraped furiously over a rock, bruised across a second, and struck a third with crushing force. He clutched its slippery top with both hands, releasing Buck. "Go, Buck, go!" When he heard Thornton's command, he partly reared out of the water, throwing his head high, then turned obediently toward the bank. He was dragged ashore by Pete and Hans at the very point where swimming ceased to be possible and destruction began. They attached the line to Buck's neck and shoulders and launched him into the stream. He struck out boldly, but not straight enough into the stream. He discovered the mistake too late. Hans promptly snubbed with the rope, and he was jerked under the surface, and under the surface he remained till his body struck against the bank and he was hauled out. Again the rope was attached and he was launched, this time straight into the stream. Buck held on till he was on a line straight above Thornton. Then he turned and headed down upon him. Thornton saw him coming, and as Buck struck him like a battering ram, he reached up and closed with both arms around the shaggy neck. Thornton came to, belly downward, and being violently propelled back and forth across a log by Hans and Pete. His first glance was for Buck, finding 3 broken ribs. "That settles it. We camp right here." And camp they did, till Buck's ribs knitted, and he was able to travel. That winter at Dawson, Buck performed another exploit. It was brought about by a conversation in the El Dorado saloon. One man stated that his dog could start a sled with 500 pounds and walk off with it. Yeah, Buck can start 1,000 pounds and break it out and walk off with it for 100 yards. Well, I got $1,000 that says he can't, and here it is. I got a sled standing outside now with 20, 50-pound sacks of flour on it. The El Dorado emptied its occupants into the street to see the test. The sled had been standing for a couple hours, and in the intense cold, the runners had frozen fast to the hard-packed snow. The team of 10 dogs was unhitched, and Buck, with his own harness, was put into the sled. He felt that in some way he must do a great thing for John Thornton. Thornton knelt down by Buck's side. He took his head in his 2 hands and rested cheek on cheek. He did not playfully shake him, but he whispered in his ear, "As you love me, Buck, as you love me." Buck seized his mittened hand between his jaws. It was the answer, in terms not of speech, but of love. Thornton stepped back. "Now, Buck! Chee!" Buck swung to the right. The load quivered, and from under the runners arose a crisp crackling. Haw! Buck duplicated the maneuver, this time to the left. The sled was broken out. Now! Mush! Buck threw himself forward, tightening the traces with a jarring lunge. Then the sled lurched ahead 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 2 inches. The sled gained momentum till it was moving steadily along. Thornton was running behind, encouraging Buck with short, cheery words. The distance had been measured off, and as he neared the pile of firewood which marked the end of the 100 yards, a cheer began to grow which burst into a roar as he passed the firewood and halted at a command. Hats and mittens were flying in the air. But Thornton fell on his knees beside Buck. Head was against head, and he was shaking him back and forth. Buck seized Thornton's hand in his teeth. The onlookers drew back to a respectful distance, nor were they indiscreet enough to interrupt. When Buck earned $1,600 in 5 minutes for John Thornton, he made it possible for his master to journey with his partners into the East after a fabled lost mine. The months came and went, and back and forth they twisted through the uncharted vastness where no men were. Spring came on once more, and they found not the lost cabin, but a shallow place in a broad valley where the gold showed like yellow butter across the bottom of the washing pan. Each day they worked, they earned them thousands of dollars in clean dust and nuggets. The gold was sacked in moose-hide bags, 50 pounds to the bag, piled like so much firewood outside the Spruce Bough Lodge. There was nothing for the dogs to do, and Buck spent long hours musing by the fire. The vision of the short-legged man came to him frequently, and closely akin to the visions of the hairy man was the call, still sounding in the depths of the forest. One night, he sprang from sleep with a start. From the forest came the call, a long, drawn howl. And he knew it as a sound heard before. He sprang through the sleeping camp in swift silence, dashed through the woods, till he came to an open place among the trees, and looking out, saw erect on haunches, with nose pointed to the sky, a long, lean timber wolf. Buck did not attack, but circled him about and hedged him in with friendly advances. The wolf was suspicious and afraid. But in the end, Buck's pertinacity was rewarded, for the wolf, finding that no harm was intended, started off at an easy lope. He made it clear to Buck that he was to come. Buck was wildly glad. He knew he was at last answering the call, running by the side of his wood brother. They stopped by a running stream to drink, and stopping, Buck remembered John Thornton. He sat down. The wolf started on toward the place from where the call surely came, but Buck turned about and started slowly on the back track. John Thornton was eating dinner when Buck, dashing into camp, sprang upon him in a frenzy of affection, playing the tomfool, as John Thornton characterized it. After 2 days, the call in the forest began to sound more imperiously than ever. Once again he took to wandering in the woods. He began to sleep out at night, staying away from camp for days at a time, killing his meat as he traveled. The blood-longing became stronger than ever. He was a killer. His cunning was wolf cunning and wild cunning. As the fall of year came on, the moose appeared in greater abundance. Buck had dragged down a part-grown calf, but he wished for larger and more formidable quarry. A band of 20 moose had crossed over from the land of streams and timber, and chief among them was a great bull. His small eyes burned with a vicious light while he roared with fury at sight of Buck. From the bull's side protruded a feathered arrow end, which accounted for his savageness. Buck proceeded to cut the bull out from the herd. There is a patience of the wild, and it belonged to Buck as he clung to the flank of the herd, retarding its march and driving the wounded bull mad with helpless rage. Day and night, Buck never left his prey, never gave it a moment's rest, never permitted it to browse the leaves of trees or the shoots of young birch and willow. The great head drooped more and more under its tree of horns, and the shambling trot grew weaker and weaker. At last, at the end of the 4th day, he pulled the great moose down. For a day and a night he remained by the kill, eating and sleeping, turn and turn about. Then rested and refreshed and strong, he turned his face toward camp and John Thornton. As he held on, he became more and more conscious of a new stir in the land. The birds talked of it, the squirrels chatted about it, the very breeze whispered it. He was oppressed with a sense of calamity happening. As he crossed the last watershed and dropped down into the valley toward camp, he proceeded with greater caution. 3 miles away, he came upon a fresh trail that sent his neck hair bristling. It led straight toward camp and John Thornton. As Buck slid along with the obscureness of a gliding shadow, his nose was jerked suddenly to the side, as though a positive force had gripped and pulled. He followed the new scent into a thicket and found Nig. He was lying on his side, dead where he had dragged himself, an arrow protruding from either side of his body. From the camp came the faint sound of many voices rising and falling in a sing-song chant. Buck peered out where the Spruce Bough Lodge had been. A gust of overpowering rage swept over him. The Yeehats were dancing about the wreckage of the lodge. They heard a fearful roaring and saw rushing upon them an animal the like of which they had never seen before. It was Buck, hurling himself upon them in a frenzy to destroy. He sprang at the foremost man, ripping the throat wide open. He plunged about in their midst, tearing, rending, destroying in constant and terrific motion. So inconceivably rapid were his movements, and so closely were the Indians tangled together, that one young hunter, hurling a spear at Buck in midair, drove it through the chest of another that the point broke through the skin of the back and stood out beyond. Then a panic seized the Yeehats, and they fled in terror to the woods, proclaiming as they fled the advent of the evil spirit. And truly Buck was the fiend incarnate, raging at their heels and dragging them down like deer as they raced through the trees. Buck, wearying of the pursuit, returned to the desolate camp. Thornton's desperate struggle was fresh written on the earth, and Buck scented every detail of it down to the edge of the pool. By the edge, head and forefeet in the water, lay Skeet. The pool itself, muddy, effectually hid what it contained, and it contained John Thornton, for Buck followed his trace into the water, from which no trace led away. All day Buck brooded by the pool. He knew John Thornton was dead. It left a great void in him which food could not fill. At times when he paused to contemplate the carcasses of the Yeehats, he was aware of a great pride in himself. He had killed man, and he had killed in the face of the law of club and fang. Night came on, and a full moon rose high over the trees into the sky. From far away drifted a faint, sharp yelp, followed by a chorus of similar sharp yelps. Hunting their living meat, the wolf pack poured in a silvery flood, and in the center of the clearing stood Buck, motionless as a statue. A moment's pause fell, till the boldest one leaped straight for him. Like a flash, Buck struck, breaking the neck. 3 others tried, and one after another they drew back, streaming blood from slashed throats and shoulders. So well did he face them, that at the end of a half hour, the wolves drew back, discomforted. One wolf, long and lean and gray, advanced cautiously. In a friendly manner, Buck recognized the wild brother with whom he had run for a night and a day. They touched noses. Then an old wolf sat down, nose at the moon, and broke out the long wolf howl. The others lay down and howled, and now the call came to Buck in unmistakable accents. He too sat down and howled. The leaders lifted the yelp of the pack and sprang away into the woods. The wolves swung in behind, and Buck ran with them, side by side with the wild brother, yelping as he ran. The Yeehats tell of a ghost dog that runs at the head of the pack. It has cunning greater than they, stealing from their camps in fierce winters, robbing their traps, slaying their dogs, and defying their bravest hunters. Each fall, when the Yeehats follow the movements of the moose, there is a certain valley which they never enter. In the summers, there is one visitor, however, to that valley. It is a great, gloriously coated wolf. He crosses alone from the smiling timberland and comes down into an open space among the trees. Here a yellow stream flows from the rotted moose-hide sacks and sinks into the ground. And here he muses for a time, howling once, long and mournfully ere he departs. But he is not always alone. When the long winter nights come on, he may be seen running at the head of the pack through the glowing borealis, his great throat a-bellow as he sings a song of the younger world, which is the song of the pack.